My dad used to say, thing about Canada is Quebec always wants out and Alberta always wants in. I never thought I would see the day when Alberta would go from being passionately Canadian and wanting in to trying to find a way to get out.
In a recent interview with the Western Standard, the Premier of Alberta provides an update on what's been going on with the Alberta separation movement. She references the legal path that the province has if it wants to leave the Canadian Confederation, based on a previous ruling by the Supreme Court. She also gives her perspective on the upcoming independence referendum, as well as her list of demands that she gave the Government of Canada as an ultimatum, in hopes to avoid a unity crisis which may lead to Alberta separating.
It now seems on almost certainty that in 2026, Albertans will go to the polls and vote on if it wishes to declare independence and become a nation in its own right. To discuss more, we're joined by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Derek. Good to talk to you again.
You have outlined some very clear demands of the new Carney Liberal government and given them a 6-month timeline in which we expect to see actions over words. There is still more than 5 months left on your timeline, but what happens from you and your government if that time elapses and there's not been substantive progress?
What I would hope to see is that I've identified 9 pieces of legislation that need to be repealed or substantially revised in order to send the message that there is a restart in the relationship with Alberta, and also to pave the way for some of the economic corridors and the construction of pipelines. I'll just give you an example. So you cannot establish an economic corridor to Port of Prince Rupert if you're not prepared to amend C-69 to build the pipeline so that it's not a 10-year approval process. If you get a bitumen pipeline going to Prince Rupert, you have to repeal the tanker ban because otherwise you're not able to load it onto a ship. You cannot have a production cap, which is what an emissions cap is. Otherwise, there's going to be no one with the incentive to invest to expand the production in order to fill those pipelines. And you also can't continue to punish the industry who wants to develop by restricting the amount of low-cost power they're going to have because you've got unrealistic net power regulations. So every single thing I've asked for is in aid of demonstrating that the federal government wants to help us get our product to market, help us find new markets. And so I would look at that as a measure of good faith that they're willing to work with us. Haven't seen it yet, but the week is still young.
I think it's highly probable that the independence issue is going to be on the floor of the next convention of your party. I'm sure, I know you can't discuss internal caucus meetings, but I'm sure it's been an issue. If this comes to the floor of your party's next convention, though, isn't it going to potentially force the party itself to take a side in the referendum as that's going on?
I think that is just a foundational principle of what the United Conservatives are all about and why these kinds of issues really need to be put to the general electorate, because you can't have 400 or 500 people coming to a party conference deciding on behalf of 5 million Albertans. There are certain issues that are so important, they've got to be put to the general public. That's the case I'm making to our members. It's the case I'm making to our board. And I think it is that is what the foundational principles of our party are. And so that's why as leader, I'm taking that seriously. Is why I believe it's my job to fight for a new deal for Alberta within Canada, and to make sure that we take every measure possible to protect our constitutional sovereignty as defined under the Constitution. I've been doing that since the minute I got elected, and I'm going to keep on doing that.
So in 2026, through Citizens Initiative, Albertans are very likely to vote in a referendum to decide if they will declare independence. I know the first thing you learn in politics is don't answer a hypothetical, but I don't think it's a particularly hypothetical to consider a potential yes vote. Right now, the polls show if there's a vote today, no would win. But campaigns have a way of changing things. The Charlottetown Accord was supposed to be a sure thing. The entire establishment of Canada and all of the major parties in the House of Commons all supported the yes side. Yet there was a no rebellion that ended up winning in the Charlottetown Accord. Brexit, it was the same thing, just flipped onto the yes side. In the event of a yes vote, would you lead Alberta through the process of an independence?
So the interviewer asked her the elephant in the room question about what she would do if Albertans choose to vote for independence in a referendum. Taking into account that as of the time this video was published, support isn't over the 50% mark quite yet, but there are several examples in which unlikely outcomes ended up happening. A Canadian example was what was called the Charlottetown Accord, which went to a referendum where almost all politicians, the media, the business sector, all supported voting yes on it, and were telling the people to do just that. But the people ended up voting no, overwhelmingly. Another much more recent example is the unlikely Brexit vote, where every European leader, British politician, the media, celebrities, and every public figure was against it. But we all know how that referendum went. Premier Smith has stated multiple times that her goal is for Alberta to be respected and treated fairly within Canada, but that she would respect the will of Albertans, whether they choose to stay or separate.
The question I would have for Albertans is, what are the issues that we need to make progress on to make them feel comfortable that Canada finally respects Alberta and is on Team Alberta? That's part of the reason why I'm going to be doing a consultation over the next 6 months. I want to find out what the real pressure points are. I suspect I know a lot of them, but I don't know that I know all of them.
You said that any independence vote would have to respect First Nations treaty rights, and I think that's a given on both sides, that would have to be the case. But I want to clarify what you meant by that.
Clarity Act doesn't just apply to Quebec, I think I know that the media likes to think that the movement that we're seeing among grassroots Albertans is somehow offside, but the Supreme Court has already determined that a province does have a right to self-determination. But I think they've also recognized that you can't ignore treaty rights. So I would leave it to legal scholars to give you an answer to that question. All I know is that we don't see the Quebec separatist movement packing up. In fact, the Parti Québécois is pulling at the top. We don't see the Bloc Québécois saying, oh, gee, this is not possible, therefore we're not going to do it. They just elected another 23 members to the House of Commons. And so I would just put it back on the legal community to maybe have that debate and discussion, because it seems to me that the Supreme Court has said something quite clear in the Clarity Act, and that applies to any province who chooses to go down that path.
The irony of this whole thing is the amount of hostility thrown at Albertans for wanting to choose their own destiny. Yet Quebec has been pampered and spoiled every time they chose to pursue their independence. To add insult to injury, a lot of that pampering and spoiling is done using Alberta dollars. Let that sink in. Liberal politicians, the media, and many on the left will have you believe that Albertans' right to self-determination somehow undermines or violates Indigenous treaty rights. This is just another tactic they're using to attack the movement and smear anyone who supports it. The Supreme Court has already ruled on this through a law called the Clarity Act, which establishes that the treaties would be protected and would remain the same in the new country unless Indigenous leadership decides to enter into voluntary negotiations with the new authorities. It also ensures that Native Albertans get a seat at the table during all negotiations. So clearly, the media is yet again trying to create a false narrative. The question is, what's motivating those on the left to use the Indigenous issue as a point against the Alberta independence movement? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a solid and hit that subscribe button so I can continue bringing you these video updates. Thanks for watching.